economics looked like in the 19th century. Because the whole idea was that labor is being protected, that's not the natural law, and so everyone else in society ganging them up to create more competition. So this idea of social Darwinism, you shouldn't help people out, you shouldn't, government shouldn't spend the money, the government shouldn't get involved in the economy. And then along came the Great Depression. Before we get that, let me just give you the conventional wisdom at that time. In Victorian age, late 1800s, when things went down, when the economy went down, it was like kind of what you call a hangover theory, right? When the economy was up, it was like a big, everyone at a party getting drunk, and then the next day you had a hangover and the economy crashed and went down. You had to pay for all the fun you had the night before. And so, they had words, they described depressions as cold douches. Think of this as like a cold shower. Right after you did all the drinking and had all the fun, you have to take that cold shower to wake you up the next morning. And what these depressions did, they purged the rottenness. It was like cleaning a dirty system, because people were just too crazy and happy and exuberant, and they took out loans they shouldn't have, and they bought too big houses, and they bought big cars. And the depression is kind of God coming in and said, you were behaved really badly, now you have to pay. And this led to this idea that no pain, no gain. So you hear this very often today in our society, that we have to tighten our budgets, tighten our belts. People have to cut back on frivolous expenses because we have to, in a sense, suffer for our sins we had before when we took out too many mortgages and had too much debt. And the only way to get back to a good society is basically to, pay the price. And this is sort of like Job, right? Geez, Job, things are pretty bad. They can only be bad for you because you were a bad person. So you have to figure out what your sin is. Figure out what your sin is, and then you can apologize to God, and then God will give you all your stuff back. And in modern times, it's usually called the pain caucus, meaning there's a bunch of people out there that says you have to, the house of pain. You have to go and tighten your belt. People have to lose their jobs. People have to not enjoy all the things they had before. The government has to cut back on its budget, etc. And people believed this right up to the Great Depression, but then the Great Depression really changed how people thought about this, because people did cut back, and governments did cut back on their budgets, and people did try to save money, and the economy just kept getting worse. And so this is sort of, you see in this cartoon here, where the boss is talking to the workers saying, well, we have to lay you off because the economy is bad. Okay, economy is bad, we're going to lay off workers to save money. But guess what? We can't rehire you because until you start spending money and buying the stuff that we're making. And you might think, well, how am I supposed to buy stuff if I don't have a job and I'm not making any money? But you also have to pay down your debt, right? You took out all these loans, you had a mortgage, you have all this credit card debt. So don't buy anything, just pay down all the money you owe first. But you know what? You're unemployed, so obviously it's going to take you a long time, and so this is going to be a jobless recovery. And of course the workers say, well, how am I supposed to do all this when you won't give me a job? And basically it's like magic, right? The boss says, surprise us, go out and spend money. Well, along came one person named John Maynard Keynes, and he said, look, the Victorians had it all wrong. Okay? Punishment doesn't imply a sin or a sinner. He says, look, just because you punish people, it doesn't mean that they actually did anything wrong. Just because there's a depression doesn't mean that people behave badly. Things just happen. Virtue is not equal happiness. They're separate things. It's not because people were bad before that we're having all this, let's say, things that are things are going bad right now. The economy is like a machine. Sometimes the machine breaks down. It's not anyone's fault. It's like, for example, sometimes your computer breaks down even when you're doing the right thing. Sometimes people have accidents even when they're good drivers. It's not because, you didn't get the accident just because you were a bad driver. There's probably other things here. And he said, look, we have to reject this idea of balancing thinking, this idea that there's no such thing as a free lunch, right? You have to balance the books. Because what happens is if everyone tries to stop spending at the same time, then there's no one who's going to be a buyer. And if there's no buyers, then how can we make anything and how can we sell anything? So the point is, if everyone tries to save money, as they often do in depressions, then incomes are going to shrink, and this is going to lead to the paradox of thrift. The more money you save, the less you'll have. So saving in depressions becomes a very bad idea. And particularly, Keynes said, look, government should actually spend more money. Spend more money, not less. And so when income and revenues decrease and the private sector isn't making money, the government should actually, go out on a spending binge and make up for all the money that other people aren't buying. Make up for all, let's say, all the spending that's not happening in the rest of the economy. So let's go back to Marx. Now, it's very often today that Marx has been discredited, right? He was supposedly predicted inevitable revolutions. We would all go to socialism. Didn't seem to happen. So he wasn't quite Nostradamus. He got that wrong. People tell you, well, look to Eastern Europe, look to Russia. All these communist countries failed. Capitalism won. It must mean that Marx was wrong about communism. Capitalism is the best system you can have. And throughout the rest of the world, in India, Latin America, they got rid of their big states that were involved in import substitution. And, they wouldn't have central planning. Everyone wants to have a market economy. Everyone wants to have a Wall Street. Everyone's becoming like the United States. But Marx did get a lot of things right. Despite everyone cutting back and everyone criticizing the government, public spending has grown. Governments do a lot more things now than they did back 100, 120 years ago. 120 years ago, most people didn't go to school. There was no high school. There was no health care. There was no health care insurance, public or private. And so guess what? Doctors didn't make a lot of money. Governments didn't do a lot of things. So governments in the 20th century, we've gone from about 30% of the GDP, basically, or rather like 1% to 10% of the GDP being spent on public projects or in taxes. And now most developed countries spend between 30 and 60%. So maybe Marx was right that, guess what? The big government is here. And Marx was also right that capitalism would there would be a lot more uncertainty, there would be a lot more instability, and therefore we would have to protect people from kind of, let's say, this invisible hand and its destabilizing effects. So we socialize education, right? Most of us go to public schools. There are some private schools, but most of us expect to have free education until we're seniors. K through 12 education, we don't charge you a fee because you're getting an education, even though it's worth a lot of money. In most countries, including the United States, we have socialized health insurance. We don't make seniors pay for their own medical costs, which would be very large. Okay, we charge everyone, let's say, for Medicare and Medicaid, and we make health insurance basically free or at least very low in price. We socialize retirement, right? We have the Social Security system. We have 401k, which gives you tax deductions for saving money. We socialize our banking system. We have the Federal Reserve and for example, even if the bank fails, the money you have in the bank doesn't disappear. The government insures it. And Marx is also correct about a lot of other things. He was one of the first people to talk about globalization, the idea that technology and communication would bring the world closer together. He wrote some very, very insightful essays about India and how India would change as it became part of the world economy. He's one of the first people to talk about materialism. He had a word called fetish commodities. Right? You might say someone has a fetish, and you probably think, oh, that has to do with sex. No. What Marx was saying is that people would want things. Okay, people would, instead of trying to be a particular type of person, people would define themselves by the things they have, the clothes they wear, designer dreams, having the right brand. And we would have these fetishes or obsessions with having things. Nice car, nice house. But not because we would use them, but because we kind of wanted to show everyone off. Like, oh my gosh, see what nice clothes I'm wearing, or see what kind of car I drive, or see how big my house is in. Even if we didn't need the space. And he was also right that, look, government was going to grow, one way or the other. Marx did not see that as a good thing. But he said, eventually you're going to have more executive power, more power in the presidency. You're going to have larger bureaucracies. So get used to it, because as capitalism makes the world more complex, there's going to be more of a demand for government services. And I just had to put this sign here. I think this is from a protest in Eastern Europe, but basically, Karl Marx is probably more right than we often give him credit. He was right about a lot of things. He was right about a lot of the problems in capitalism. He might not have been right about some of his predictions about the future and how history would play itself out, but you know what? He isn't really quite discredited. I just want to stop and just look at, this is not I'm not going to go into this in detail, but I just want to talk about, rather than think of the world as socialism, communism, capitalism, a better way to look at the world is once to kind of go back to our two kind of principles in economics and divide things by things that are organized by the market and things that are organized by plans, which means government makes plans or businesses make plans. And also this means versus ends, this idea that do we have an ideological view of the world, we have a clear idea of how we want the world to be and we make the world in that image, or do we have kind of, let's say, a very pragmatic view of the world? And so one way of thinking of this is that when you have ideological plans like communist countries, they have a certain idea of how the world is going to be, and they're going to use the government to create that world. That's kind of here in the bottom right-hand corner, like state socialism. That would be like the former Soviet Union, Eastern Europe, probably communist China, at least in some periods of time. It's a little more complicated in China, but I don't want to get in too much into that now. And then you have people who are, let's say, bottom left-hand corner, they're ideological about the market. The market is good, it provides freedom, we don't want coercion. But this is kind of the laissez-faire attitude. The government should stay out regardless, even if the government could do some good. So this is kind of like Oliver Twist in Dickensian England, the Gilded Age in America with the robber barons, and in many senses, the current philosophy in the United States. In most of Europe and Japan, in the upper right-hand corner, you have a lot of government involvement, but it's not like it's ideological. It's not like they're trying to create a socialist society. They just think that the government works better, or society works better when the government gets involved and provides public goods and provides certain services, and it provides nannies for new mothers, or it provides days off so you can raise your children, and you have public education all the way through college, and you have social welfare state and protection for the unemployed. This is how most of the developed world works. In the United States, and to a lesser extent in England and Canada, you might call them what they're called liberal market economies, which means that we don't want the government to have a very big role. We want the government to have a small role, and not because of ideological reasons, because we think the market is the best system that exists. We'll get more into explaining this later on, but this is kind of just a good way to think about the different types of economy.